So fine. So unwinding that digression a bit, it looks like we don't know what this provider bit is about, do we? There's,
No.
clearly the provider conf, whatever it is part of the config, and then let's just see how we use that, shall we? And maybe we'll figure out what it's for. What happens next?
Okay. So next, looks like we're using the logger again. So logger.info to console, and then it has the string starting FTPD tests, and it's also using the provider in the string as well, and it's going to use the provider conf.driver value.
Oh, okay. So that comment says driver must be one of the supported providers. We don't know exactly what the provider is, but it's something relating to it. Sounds like it's something to do with who provides the actual server, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or either that or the thing that drives the tests. Don't know. Let's move on and see if that becomes clearer later.
Okay. So now we're setting up this common conf variable, and we're setting it equal to config.get common config.
Mm-hmm.
After that, we're setting up this thing called home base path, and we're going to set that to the os.TempDir
Yep.
value. Then moving on, there's an if statement, if runtime.g OOS.
Yeah, we've pronounced that goose, apparently.
GOOS. Okay.
Runtime.goose, yeah,
Got
or
it.
GoOS,
Okay.
I
Okay.
suppose, which evidently can be, you know. Um, so there's, as you know, Go is good at building itself for multiple platforms, multiple architectures, and it makes that distinction in the binaries because it has to, really, doesn't it? Like, obviously, you could have a Windows machine or Linux or Darwin for Mac OS or whatever,
Mhm.
but you could also have different types of CPUs, couldn't you? You could have ARM64 or x86, whatever. So they're orthogonal. So you have these two environment variables that control compilation, GOOS and GOARCH, or GOARCH. So on um, on a Mac, for example, GOOS would be Darwin and GOARCH would be AMD 64 or ARM 64 now, if you've got an M1 Mac. If so, lucky you. um, but we're looking at it here because the runtime package will actually tell you, what OS are we running on. Um, in this case, we want to know, is it Windows or is it not Windows, isn't it?
Yep. Looks like not Windows. Yep.
So if Goose is not OS Windows, which I'm guessing is some constant, what actually is that constant? Is it just a string? Yeah, it's just the string Windows. Don't know why you really need a constant for that.
Right.
Just the literal string Windows would have been fine, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'll write all these down and put in a PR, shall I? It's inevitable that we're going to sort of editorialize
Sure.
as we
Sure.
look at stuff, and that's okay, isn't it?
Mm.
I
Yep.
mean, the author might not be too pleased, but it's what we all do anyway, isn't it? As we sort of try to read code, try to understand it, and then say, well, would I have done this? What would be the right thing to do here?
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's legit. Um, so what do we do if we're not on Windows then?
So then we proceed to use the common conf dot actions dot execute on, and it's setting that to uh, slice of string with the values download, upload, rename, and delete.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, we're setting common conf.actions.hook equal to the hook command path.
Okay. Don't know what any of this is about yet, but we could maybe guess it's something like from the names and the context and so forth. We might guess something like you could configure hooks that are run on any of these actions, isn't it? Like if you download something, you could configure the server to automatically execute some command every time there's a download, an upload, a rename, or a delete operation. We're speculating wildly, but that seems at least reasonable, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yep.
Apparently we can't do any of this on Windows, though.
Right.
Don't know why. Maybe that's just because it's too difficult to run commands on Windows or something like that.
Sure.
We don't know, but fine. So we can sort of ignore the rest of this, can't we? Because it's presumably
Mm-hmm.
to do with these hook commands. Okay.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to line 275 then?
Yeah, sure. So let's see. On 275, we have the cert path variable, and that's getting set to filepath.join, which is taking a os.TempDir and a string test underscore FTPD dot CRT.
Yeah, what is os.TempDir, by the way?
Let's see. TempDir returns the default directory to use for temporary files.
Okay. Which on Unix-like systems is probably going to be /tmp or something like that, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And goodness knows what on Windows. But so there could potentially be some confusion here, couldn't there? Because there's also a t.TempDir in a test. We have that in the test machinery, and t.TempDir does something different. It creates a new temporary directory for you and takes care of cleaning it up at the end of the tests.
Okay.
Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
That's a fun fact. Try to use
Yeah.
that in conversation at some point. And yeah, it's really useful because we if we need to write anything to disk in a test, we would prefer to write it somewhere temporary, wouldn't we? And then we can just clean it all up automatically afterwards. So we don't have to worry about remembering, what files did you create, what folders did you create, remember to delete them all.
Sure.
TempDir will do that for you. That's not what this is. It's just telling you, hey, where should temporary files go by default on this system? Probably /temp.
Mm-hmm.
So fine, so we're creating all of these paths, aren't we? We're creating cert path, key path, CA cert path, and CA CRL path. And if we know anything about TLS certificates and things, or I guess these are X509 certificates because it's sFTP, right? But TLS is just HTTP over X509, if you like, isn't it? So we have all of this machinery which is associated with X509 certs, and we don't have time to have a complete explanation of public key cryptography right now, do we? Although that would be fun. And I'd like to try, but suffice it to say, the details don't matter, but there is such a thing as a certificate and a key, and the certificate is the public bit, the key is the private bit. You could think of it as the certificate says you are who you say you are, and the possession of the key proves that you are that person, something like that.
Yeah.
What are CAs and CRLs? Not going to tell you that. You can go look it up. I don't mean you, Jackson. I mean people in general. I'm sure you know. But we need all these bits in order to just be a cryptographically secure FTP server, don't we? So that's what that stuff is about. So what's next? Call some function and pass them all to that function.
So next, we're setting ERR equal to write certs, and then it's basically taking all the cert variables that we loaded up prior. So it's taking cert path, key path, CA, CRT path, and CA CRL path.
Mm-hmm.
So probably writing this somewhere for use.
Yeah, and we saw a bunch of this cert type data initialized at the start of this test file, didn't we? So would we guess that it's going to take that data and write it out to those cert files? Something like that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And again, why not? It would have been even better to have them as files on disk, wouldn't it? Because then we wouldn't have to write them.
Sure,
Never
sure.
mind look at them in the Go file.
Yeah, yeah.
This is fine. I mean, often when I read code and I think I'm not exactly sure why they've done something this way, when there seems, or a better way occurs to me, and there could be multiple reasons, couldn't there? I mean, one, it might just not have occurred to them. That's legit. There are lots of good ideas that don't occur to me. Or maybe it occurred to them and there's some really good reason why they can't do it that way, or prefer not to do it that way, and it hasn't occurred to me. That can also happen. Or third reason is maybe they saw this on Stack Overflow and copied and pasted it without inspecting it too closely. We've all been there, haven't we?
Yes, yeah.
So fine, at least we have a vague idea what's going on. So we're 280 plus lines in, and we're still in the set up the world phase. We haven't actually got to running a test yet. We're still setting up the test environment, but that's fine. We can keep going, can't we?
Okay. Now we're gonna set ERR equal to common dot initialize, and it's taking the common conf, so some package. Oh,
Yeah, common's a terrible name for a package, isn't it? It's like utils. Just doesn't tell you anything.
or yeah. And then we're checking the error. So error not equal to nil, and then it will write to the console, presumably, logger.warn to console,
Yeah.
and yeah, error initializing common.
I wonder why they call OS exit 1 here, because, in a regular test, we would just call t.fatal or something, wouldn't we?
Right, yeah, that's true.
That would fail the test, and I guess go on to other tests. So since we're in test main, we don't have a testing.T, we have a testing.M. So I wonder if I'm not sure what machinery is available on the M. I don't think we have fatal and error, for example, because it's not actually a test, so there's nothing to mark as failed, but we're trying to do some setup, and the setup has failed, and that means we won't be able to run tests.
Okay.
So I don't know. There might be more things that the testing.M does that I'm not aware of, but the one thing I know it does do is it can run the tests, which is important, isn't it? We mustn't forget to do that. So at some point they're going to call m.run, I think it's m.run, to actually run the tests, and maybe we'll see that, but we're still setting up. So fine, what's next at line 289 then?
Okay, so now we're setting ERR equal to data provider dot initialize, and that is taking the provider conf error, config.dir, and also boolean true.
Yep, we have no idea what that means. As we've said, that's a bit problematic. And it doesn't affect that there's just so much initialization and setup here. I mean, this is, presumably you would have to do this just to run the server.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some test fixture set up here, isn't there? But there's a whole load of this config reading, initializing the config, initializing the provider, all of that. Like this seems like a ton of paperwork, doesn't it?
Yeah.
As you know, I hate paperwork in Go programs, as in other areas of life, and I always want it to be. I kind of feel like I want people to use my library. I mean, I'm probably just writing it for myself, but it's nice if other people use it. And I don't think it's a given that they will want to, is it? I mean, they might be like, oh, some random guy on the internet's written a library. Whoop-de-doo, why should I use that? And they might take a look at it and they go, well, how easy is it to use? Oh my God, nothing like easy. There's, 300 plus lines of initialization and setup. Well, you know what? I'm not going to use that one. I'll use something else. So I just feel like I don't have a store of credibility with potential users that I can afford to spend like this. I sort of want to make it as easy and painless a process as possible. Ideally, it'll just be like import John's package.run, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
That that
definitely.
that would be ideal. I
Mhm.
mean, maybe we can't, get exactly that. Maybe we have to pass one or two parameters or something. But I definitely want to keep it minimal.
Mhm.
And I think the secret to that is just defaulting everything, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Some yeah, useful defaults would help.
Yeah. I mean, like usually, um, there's lots of things you can configure, but not many things that you must configure. Um, if you think of an API client, for example, um, the API URL might be configurable, but you shouldn't have to supply it every time you use the client. It should just default to what it actually is. Um, your API token or credentials, however, there's no default for that, is there? You actually have to supply those.
Right.
So there's a slight difference. And for everything that can have defaults, I would like to provide a way for users to be able to customize those, but I don't want to require them to customize them every time, just in order to do the simplest use case. Think about the HTTP library in Go, for example. If you just want to quickly make an HTTP request with no fancy settings, you can just call http.Get, can't you?
Yep. Yep.
That just uses some, as it turns out, default client, um, which isn't actually very well configured. So you probably do want to create your own HTTP client, configure it, and then call get on that. That's fine, you can do that. So it's not sort of, it's not usability versus configurability, is it? You can have either. You can say, I just want the simple use case, just give me the default one. Um, that's what this server doesn't have, apparently. Um, or you can specify mile after mile of YAML settings, which apparently you have to do. Okay, initialization, configuration, all of that stuff. Fine. Should we scroll through this a bit and just see if we
Sure.
can skip on? If we can ever get to the end of the initialization phase,
Sure.
that would
Sure.
be great. Okay, what about line 305? This looks a bit more interesting from here, doesn't it?
Sure. Yeah. So 305 httpd conf variable getting set to config.get httpd config.
Okay, I'm reasonably happy with that.
Uh, then below that, httpd conf.bindings 0 dot port equal to 8079.
Yeah,
Then
what's
we're
what's this HTTP server for, do you think?
um,
I can understand FTP server because that's what
mhm,
this is testing, but not sure where the HTTP server comes into it. Does it have
yeah,
does it have both? Is that how it works? You can upload and download via HTTP as well as FTP? I don't know.
yeah, it could be. Maybe they're trying to spin up some UI at some point. I don't know.
Oh, that's a thought, yeah. Yeah, should we park that with the Department of Mysteries for now and then we'll see
Sure,
where that
sure.
may become clear later on.
Okay, so let's see. Next, httpd test.set base URL and using our localhost 8079.
Okay, yeah, this is more packages in the project
Mhm.
that we don't know about yet. Fine, let's skip over those.
Then we're going to ftpd conf and setting that to config.get ftpd config. Yeah, so more configuration going on.
Yeah.
Uh, ftpd conf.bindings, and we're going to set that to, looks like a slice, ftpd.binding, and it's taking port 2121 and client auth type of 2.
Right, don't know what that represents. Um, a named constant would have been useful here instead of that too, wouldn't it? Because presumably there's a bunch of different auth types, each of which has a number, and those numbers mean something. but we'll never know what. So it probably doesn't matter, but I get upset about these things. I mean, it's, sometimes in my mentoring in various channels, the person that I'm working with sometimes gets a bit frustrated because they say, it seems like you're just picking up on the tiniest details. And I'm like, yeah? What's your point?